Hi and welcome to the Bible channel, and welcome to our new series called Applying the Teachings of Jesus. This is part 2 in the series, and it's called Judge Not, that you be not judged. This thought-provoking Bible deep dive study explores Jesus' profound teaching on judgment, self-reflection and mercy. What does it truly mean to judge righteously? And how should Christians apply this today? Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and leave us a comment in the comment section if you've got any questions on this video.
Do you have a principle or a set of principles which guide your life? And then to follow that with a statement which says, the things that we believe at our core, drive the way in which we behave. So the things that we believe drive the way in which we behave. And then there's a question which then follows on maybe from that. Based on what you believe, how will you actually behave? And so that sort of introduction is to say, well, this is about applying the teachings of Jesus, the sayings of Jesus. And you've got, I think, a set of 4. And with what you know, how will you behave? And they're sort of challenging things sometimes. Or now I know what I know. I know that I should do such and such a thing. That doesn't always come so easily for us, does it? Now, in chapter 22 of the Gospel of Matthew, you may want to turn there, but Matthew 22, we're getting towards the end of the Lord's ministry, and we are 4 days before the sacrifice of the Master. And the process here in chapter 22 is the inspection of the Passover lamb. And each of the divisions of the elite of the Jewish hierarchy of the time come to the Lord Jesus and present him with their, as it were, favourite hard questions. How will he respond? The last of those questioners is described in verse 35 as a lawyer. Verse 34 says, the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence. They were gathered together. One of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the great commandment of the law? And the explanatory text there is to say that it was presented, he was tempting. And other versions you may have testing. So the question is presented in some kind of trap. There's a degree of insincerity probably within the questioner. But the response which the Master gives, of course, is textbook, isn't it? It's the perfect response to a question which is presented, however insincerely it might be. What does he say? Verse 37, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. And it's an expression that we know well enough, I'm sure. Thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. And I want to suggest to you that the formula, the concept which is built into the response which Jesus gives is linked to the expression which has come to be known as the Golden Rule, which is variously expressed in something like, do unto others as you would be done by, or some sort of variation of that particular expression. So this Golden Rule is, broadly speaking, do unto others as you would be done by. But this golden rule has many threads, many parts to it. It links to many other parts of the Scriptures, both Old Testament and New Testament. And I'm sure we can see that there's a close relationship between loving one's neighbour as oneself and doing unto others as you would be done by. We can see how closely that they're related in concept or theme. And this biblical golden rule is acknowledged and accepted even by the enemies of Christianity in many senses. There are many philosophers who've used that same concept, and I've got a couple of them here for you, that even some of the enemies of Christianity have done obeisance to the value of this golden rule. And you may have come across John Stuart Mill, English philosopher in the mid-1800s, and he wrote, to do as one would be done by, and to love one's neighbour as oneself, constitute the ideal perfection of utilitarian morality. He is writing as a philosopher. He is somewhat of an enemy of Christianity, discarded any aspect of denominational religion. And he acknowledges this golden rule as the ideal perfection of utilitarian morality. And then Thomas Paine, English born but an American founding father, again, no Christian and somewhat against Christianity. And he writes, the duty of man is plain and simple and consists of but 2 points: his duty to God, which every man must feel, and with respect to his neighbour, to do as he would be done by. But so neither of those writers, neither of those philosophers, thinkers are Christian in the conventional sense of the word, but they acknowledge the power and the value of this particular rule, to do unto others as you would be done by. Now, within Matthew 7, which Brother has read for us as an introduction, verse 12 contains, I think, that golden rule in similar sort of terms. It's not strictly the same, but it's broadly similar. And so our chapter, which opens with "Judge not that ye be not judged," which we'll try and come back to in a second, concludes that section at verse 12. Therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And I'm suggesting to you that verse 12 concludes a particular section which the gospel writer is presenting to us. There's a theme which runs through it, and hopefully we'll see in a moment that same spirit is there within the "judge not that ye be not judged." And this statement in verse 12 links, as I'm sure we'll appreciate, is basically a citation from Leviticus. So the golden rule is a positive expression, isn't it? Do unto others. It's do something. It's positive. Whereas the opening verse says, "Judge not that ye be not judged," is somewhat more negative, isn't it? It's don't do something. And though we've got this idea that we can live by some core simple principles, it's never quite as simple as just this, here's the golden rule, or here's this particular aspect. There's always much more to it, isn't there? We can't just boil it down to a simple, stark statement. And I was reading a book a little while ago, and I came across something, or a phrase, which maybe I should be embarrassed to admit this, but it seemed new to me. And it was something called the silver rule. I don't know whether you've come across something called the silver rule. I'd heard of the golden rule, and that was fine. But the silver rule is just effectively the same thing, but expressed negatively. And there's a value and there's a usefulness in it in some curious way. And the silver rule goes something like this. Do not to another something which, if done to you, would cause you pain. Right? So it's the same sort of thing, but expressed negatively, and that has a usefulness about it. And there's a Talmudic story which I came across, which I sort of rather enjoyed. I'm going to share with you. It's a question presented by a Gentile to two rabbis, first century before Christ. And this Gentile presents his question to these two rabbis in turn, and he says, I want you to describe the whole of the Torah to me, but I want you to do it only in the time that it takes while I'm standing on one leg. So he wants the whole of the thing to be in a really concise form. And the first rabbi is outraged and affronted by this the temerity of this question, and he sort of gives him a whack with a measuring stick and sends him away with a flea in his ear. So that's the response of rabbi number one. Rabbi number two is rather more thoughtful. And he, so the Talmudic story goes, he replies more thoughtfully and says, and I think this is worth noting, that which is hateful to you, do not to another. This is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and study. And it is said that the particular questioner then converts to Judaism, etc. Because there's a wisdom and there's a power in the response which is given. Because he says he's giving a mild, oblique rebuke to the first rabbi, because the first rabbi has done something which is inappropriate. It's wrong, isn't it? And then he's also saying that the rest of the law, the rest of the Torah, is a commentary. It's a supporting text for that same principle. And really what he's describing is this silver rule. It's the golden rule expressed negatively. And this the rest is commentary, which the rabbi uses, is, I think, allied to the language of Jesus when he says in chapter 22, which we referred to a moment ago, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. That it's not that they are, you can boil it down to this just one thing. Yes, here is the sort of pith of the thing, but you need all the rest of it to support, to comment upon, to support these two things. It's required of us that we look at the whole counsel of God. And so, coming back to chapter 7 and verse 1, and it seems to open to us as a really simple rule, doesn't it? Judge not that ye be not judged. It's really straightforward, really simple. But there's rather more going on, isn't there? Because the simple might take it too simply, at a surface level only, and not make any decisions, not come to any robust perspectives, not actually do the right thing, and perhaps worse, tolerate everything. And that's, as I say, possibly even worse. So the more we look at, the more we appreciate there's just so much more going on. And this particular interpretation given by the Holman New Testament commentary, I thought, sort of expressed it rather succinctly, rather nicely. Do not judge others until you are prepared to be judged by the same standard. And then when you exercise judgment towards others, do it with humility. And I think that captures it rather nicely for me. Do not judge others until you are prepared to be judged by the same standard. And then, when you exercise judgment toward others, do it with humility. And possibly we'll come back to this, but the comment by James seems to carry the same message with it. He shall have judgment without mercy, that hath showed no mercy. And mercy rejoiceth against judgment. We see how the theme of that corresponds with that commentary by the Holman New Testament. And the parable of the unmerciful servant also seems to link with this. And it's Matthew chapter 18. We'll know it well. Matthew 18, and I think ultimately we really get to verse 28, but we know how it is. The servant has a huge debt that he's unable to pay, and he prostrates himself to his master and says, have patience with me, I'll pay you all. But his master has compassion on him and forgives him the whole debt. But what does this servant then do? He goes and grabs one of his own peers who owes him a trifling sum by comparison, and sort of grabs him by the neck and says, "Pay me that thou owest." And even when implored for mercy, he says no, puts him into prison and so on. And his colleagues are appalled by this behaviour, aren't they? And they tell the master, who then passes a probably more severe judgment than might otherwise have been. And so we see how the recompense is paid. The way in which the unmerciful servant has behaved is then paid back to him, and we can see the value in that. So the initial kindness and the generosity that he received has not then been reciprocated. And so if we go back to Matthew 7 and the first couple of verses, "Judge not that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, Let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye." Now, if we think about it, there are scores of Old Testament passages which speak about the importance and the value of judgment. The necessity to appoint and apply appoint judges and apply judgment. Here's just a few. I'll just sort of read them out. Deuteronomy 16. "Judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Throughout thy tribes they shall judge the people with just judgment." That's Deuteronomy 16, verse 18. That's clear enough, isn't it? That's an action that's required. Or chapter 17 of Deuteronomy. "Thou shalt come unto the priests, the Levites, unto the judge that shall be in those days, and inquire. They shall show thee sentence of judgment." That's chapter 17 of Deuteronomy and verse 9. Also Deuteronomy chapter 25. Terrific opening verse, Deuteronomy 25. "If there be a controversy between men and they come into judgment, that the judges may judge them." There's a kind of repetition there that in case we miss it. then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. Niceties and the legalities weren't important. Find out who is worthy of condemnation and who is worthy of justification. And of course, we know that David the king, he reigned over all Israel, executed judgment and justice among all his people. That's 1 Chronicles 18. God looked for judgment in his people. The prophet Isaiah, chapter 5. The vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. The men of Judah, his pleasant plant. He looked for judgment. But behold oppression. For righteousness. But behold a cry. God looked for judgment to be applied. And we've got this other New Testament language which he said, judge not. We've got some sort of paradox going on here, haven't we? And the prophets, Zechariah, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, execute true judgment, show mercy and compassions every man to his brother. There's a demand placed on applying just judgment. It's not exclusively Old Testament. I didn't perhaps put enough effort into finding more New Testament ones, but 1 Corinthians chapter 6, the Apostle Paul says, if then ye have judgments of things pertaining to this life, set them to judge who are least esteemed in the ecclesia. So it's not as if something New Testament has suddenly been flipped on its head. There is still some judgment to be applied here, isn't there? So how do we think about reconciling the paradox of these requirements? One way to consider it, I suggest, is in relation to the whole of the teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. And in particular, it seems to me that it's Jesus' teaching for a generation who are about to lose the temple and all the mechanisms of their social and legal structures. He knows, not that they necessarily know, although there's a bit of prophecy to say so, but Jesus knows that within that generation, at the end of that generation, AD 70 will come upon them. Everything will be broken in relation to the Jewish commonwealth, won't it? The temple will be burned and destroyed, and the people scattered. All the mechanisms for state law and policy were going to be discarded. Jesus' teaching, in one sense, is for individuals to respond at an individual level rather than public or social policy. That's one way, at least, of thinking about what's going on. The focus isn't on community, it isn't on the state, it's on individuals. And maybe that's, as I say, a way we can interpret the Sermon on the Mount in general. Now, in the legal system, there's something which everybody loves a bit of Latin, something called the lex talionis principle. I'd never heard of it before either. But lex talionis apparently is the law of retaliation. And so it's the, as we think about the later application of law as it's developed, punishment must be commensurate with the crime. Okay, so I think probably we have it as the punishment must fit the crime or something similar to that, mustn't it? And that concept is probably expressed in the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth type of principle, which we see in the Mosaic Code, Exodus 21, Leviticus 24, and so on. So that eye for eye, tooth for tooth, is the lex talionis. It's the retaliation. It's the payment back. It's the punishment related to the crime. And I don't think, and it'd be interesting if anybody does know this, but I don't think there's any evidence in Jewish history that the Jews actually applied that law in its literality. It's a principle which is being expressed, and there's a rather, perhaps an amusing statement which is erroneously attributed to Gandhi, but all these rather interesting phrases get attributed to famous people because they're used to, it's a nice way to do it. But anyway, falsely attributed to Gandhi, which is, if we applied this rule, then an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, the whole world would soon be blind and toothless. Because we can see how the literality of that, we're all going to be on the wrong side of it, as it were. Anyway, if we have something in our eye, we can't see clearly to help somebody else. And as Jesus' statement is in verse 5, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye. And that suggests in the first instance that we've got to focus on our own behaviour. We've got to focus on what we do for ourselves and our own attitudes before we even begin to think about how we might pass judgment on someone else. It's a question of order and attitude, I suggest, not a blanket prohibition. There's the woman taken in adultery that's presented to us in John chapter 8. And she's exposed in humiliation before her accusers, isn't she? They challenge Jesus to pass judgment based on the Mosaic law. The Mosaic law says such and such, but what do you say? And the exquisite response from Jesus we know well enough, don't we? He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. Is there a beam in the eye of those who are accusing this woman? Because the record goes on to tell us that they discreetly each make their exit, don't they? Being convicted of their own sin and weakness. And then the further interaction between Jesus and the woman, again, I think is instructive for us. He doesn't condone sin. He doesn't tolerate everything. That's not the point of what's going on. His statement to the woman is clear. It's a clear judgment, really. Go and sin no more. So whatever the accusation, whether it be true or false, doesn't matter. The judgment that the Lord gives is go and sin no more. The judgment is passed. The statement is made. It's clear. It's unambiguous. And of course, it's too simplistic to say that we're never required to make a judgment. Of course, we're doing it all the time, I'm afraid, whether we want to admit it or not. It's, we may call it different things, but we're making judgments all of the time. The Apostle Paul clearly spoke of applying judgment in the case of the immoral brother at Corinth, didn't he? It was a case of wrongdoing, clear wrongdoing, and it required an appropriate action. It required a judgment that was to be applied. And if we love our brother or our sister, we should want the best for them. But that's best in relation to God's law and standards, not human assessment in the natural way of things. It's not just some whim or fancy, I want the best for you, what do you want? It's God's standards that we must think about applying. You see, if we perceive that our brother or our sister is espousing a particular way which is unwholesome, unholy, walking disorderly, as the biblical phrase has it, then we're duty bound, aren't we, to reach out, to help and to guide, effectively to judge, because we're using the Spirit Word, God's teaching, God's character, as the basis to help our brother or our sister. It's not that we're passing judgment, rather that we judge that what we have seen or perceive we think is worthy of comment, worthy of input. And then it's more about the manner and the spirit by which these things are done, which is so critically important. As that statement from the Holman commentary said, do not judge others until you are prepared to be judged by the same standard, and then when you exercise judgment toward others, do it with humility. Do it with humility. And I suggest to you that there's a common risk that we all face, that we expect others to meet a higher standard than we ourselves can achieve. And we are probably blind to that, because it's as verse 3 of chapter 7 says, considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye. You can't see it. So there's a kind of inbuilt blindness, as it were, that we've got to be particularly alert to. So as I've suggested, we're making judgments all the time. We're assessing other people by the way in which they appear to us and the way in which we see that they behave. And the question to some extent is whether we give voice to the opinions, the judgments that we are forming. But even before that happens, before we give voice to the thing that we think that we have seen, the formulating of this judgment, what's it based on? And if we're keeping our focus on biblical standards and the honour of God's name and his character, then our reactions and judgments should be consistent with that, shouldn't they? And we will then think about and speak with the best of intentions and hopes for our brother and our sister. And what is it that Jude tells us in his epistle? Others save with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment spotted by the flesh. The purpose of our judgment should be for the other's spiritual and eternal well-being, not so that we might lord it over another. And of course, there may well be people who want to live in an irresponsible lifestyle without taking any accountability for the things that they do. And such a lifestyle is not to be accepted, encouraged, condoned, whatever. It can't be consistent with biblical principles and the character of our God to allow such a thing. If we want the best for those that we come into contact with, our brothers and sisters and our young people, then we have a duty to speak according to God's judgment and express that warmly, sympathetically, with humility. The language of the prophet Isaiah again illustrates the way in which human nature can work, the wrong attitudes that develop. I need to turn back to this, but Isaiah chapter 65, it's the prophet speaking of the wickedness of his nation, and I think I may be in that nation too. Anyway, Isaiah 65 and the first few verses, I'm sought of them that asked not for me. I said, behold me unto a nation that was not called by my name. Spread out my hands all the day to rebellious people, which walked in a way that was not good. A people that provoketh me to anger continually. They remain among the graves, verse 4, lodge in the monuments, which eat swine's flesh. Verse 5, which say, stand by thyself, come not near to me, for I am holier than thou. You can see the attitude there is one of judgment of a negative type and setting up oneself as being so much better and pronouncing judgment. Well, the prophet really goes on to condemn the people. Verse 6, behold, is written before me, I will not keep silence, but will recompense, even recompense into their bosom. Your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers together, saith the Lord, which have burned incense upon the mountains, blasphemed me upon the hills. Therefore will I measure their former work into their bosom. There will be lex talionis. There will be a repayment, a punishment for the crime according to God's judgment. So God will judge according to the way in which we have judged, is the elements which are expressed in a number of places. Judgment without mercy for those that have showed no mercy. And in the New Testament also, God acts in accordance with this same principle of lex talionis, of the repayment, the punishment fits the crime. God is just, says Paul. He will pay back those who trouble you. That's 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. And we should consider Romans chapter 2. I'm probably hoping that you're going to have lots of other examples that you can bring to bear. But Romans chapter 2, one to introduce it really, the tail end of chapter 1, the wrath of God, verse 18, is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, and so on. Verse 22, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. God gave them up, verse 24, to uncleanness. And so the verses go on and on and on. Verse 28, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetous, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, and so it goes on. Verse 32, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. But it's chapter 2 that opens, which is the real challenge, I think, for us. Therefore, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest, for wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. but we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them which commit such things. So God will judge, most certainly, but the spirit by which we speak of God's judgment to help our brother is critical to our standing before our God. Verse 6, God will render to every man according to his deeds. And humanism sees the utility value of the golden rule, of the silver rule, as well as the loving of one's neighbour. But unless the great commandment of loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind is embraced and understood first, then there's no foundation. You can claim these things as golden rule, silver rule, but it needs the foundation of God's character, whom we should love with our heart, soul, strength, and mind. And we must get to grips with God's character and try to develop our characters to be like his character. As Exodus 34 tells us, he is merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, that will by no means clear the guilty. And the question that we are going to end with is this: am I prepared to be judged by the same standard that I judge by?
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.